They said nothing good ever came wrapped in something meant to be thrown away, but on a bitter Wyoming evening, Caleb Dawson found out just how wrong the world could be. The wind moved low across the plains like an old ghost dragging its breath over frozen earth, bending brittle grass beneath a sky bruised purple by the dying sun. Caleb sat alone in the cab of his rusted Ford pickup, the heater coughing weakly against the November cold as he made his way back to the ranch he barely kept alive. At 52, Caleb had become part of the land itself, weathered, silent, and worn thin by too many winters and too much grief. Since losing his wife Emma and their young son in a highway accident nearly 8 years earlier, solitude had become less of a choice and more of a sentence. His ranch, once full of laughter and hoofbeats, now stood like an aging monument to everything time had taken from him. The fence posts leaned tired against the wind. The barn roof sagged beneath old snow. And Caleb, with his calloused hands and quiet eyes, carried a loneliness deeper than the Wyoming valleys themselves. That evening, as his headlights cut through the growing dark along County Road 12, something strange caught his eye near the ditch, a pale, unnatural shape crumpled against the barbed wire fence. At first, he thought it was trash blown in by the storm, maybe an old feed sack or discarded canvas. But as he slowed, gravel crunching beneath his tires, his stomach tightened. The shape moved. Caleb killed the engine. Silence rushed in, broken only by the whistle of wind through dry brush. He stepped out, boots sinking into a thin crust of snow, his heavy coat pulled tight against the cold. The air smelled of sage, frost, and distant pine. Slowly, he approached. What he found stopped him cold. Beneath a torn, filthy burlap bag, tied crudely with fraying rope, lay a horse. The animal's body trembled violently, its once powerful frame reduced to skin, bone, and exhaustion. Frost clung to its pale grey coat. One leg was scraped raw from struggling. Its mane, what little could be seen, was tangled beneath dirt and neglect. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. For one long moment, he simply stood there, staring down at a creature as discarded as he felt himself to be. "Lord," he muttered softly, kneeling despite the ice biting through his jeans. His rough hands moved carefully, cutting away the rope with his old pocket knife. The burlap loosened and fell away. Beneath it, burned faintly into the horse's shoulder, was a brand Caleb recognized instantly, an emblem so rare, so impossible, it made his blood run colder than the snow. The horse opened one weary blue eye, and in that fragile, fading gaze, Caleb saw something he hadn't seen in years. Not fear. Not surrender. But fight. And for the first time in nearly a decade, something buried deep inside the broken rancher stirred back to life. Caleb did not speak again until the horse was safely inside the barn, where old timber walls softened the scream of the wind and the familiar scent of hay, cedar dust, and worn leather wrapped around them both like a memory too stubborn to die. Lantern light flickered across the stall as he spread fresh straw with slow, deliberate hands, his breath rising in pale clouds through the cold. The horse stood unsteady but proud, its ribs sharp beneath the silver-grey coat, its body weak yet refusing to collapse. Caleb had seen that kind of endurance before. He had seen it in his wife during her final weeks after the diagnosis. He had seen it in himself every morning since the funeral. Quiet strength had a way of surviving long after hope was supposed to be gone. He filled a bucket with warm water, mixing in oats from the last decent feed sack he had, then set it carefully near the horse's muzzle. For several seconds, the animal did not move. Its pale blue eye watched him with guarded uncertainty, as though weighing whether kindness was simply another trick. Caleb understood that look better than most. "Ain't going to hurt you," he said softly, his voice rough from years of silence. "World's already done enough of that." Slowly, the horse lowered its head. The sound of cautious drinking echoed gently through the barn, and something in Caleb's chest loosened. He leaned against the weathered stall door, studying the brand on its shoulder once more. The mark was unmistakable now beneath the grime, a crescent moon wrapped around a rearing stallion. Black Hollow Ridge. One of the oldest and wealthiest breeding ranches in Wyoming. Caleb had not heard that name in over 20 years, not since rumors spread that their bloodline of champion Mustangs had vanished after a suspicious fire destroyed much of the estate. Folk said priceless horses were lost. Records erased. Fortunes buried. Yet here stood one of those ghosts, breathing in his barn. "How in God's name did you end up in a ditch?" he whispered. Outside, the storm gathered strength, snow tapping softly against warped wooden beams. Caleb fetched old blankets, draping them gently across the horse's trembling frame. The animal flinched at first, then stilled beneath his touch. Up close, Caleb noticed more than neglect. There were old scars beneath the mud. Healing cuts. Signs of restraint. Whoever had discarded this creature had not understood what they were trying to bury. Or maybe they understood exactly. Hours passed beneath the low hum of lantern light. Caleb cleaned wounds, rubbed warmth back into frozen muscle, and worked with the same patient hands that had once taught his son how to saddle a colt beneath summer skies. Pain had hollowed him, but it had not taken his mercy. Near midnight, after the storm had fully swallowed the plains, the horse finally settled into the straw, its breathing steadier now. Caleb sat on an overturned feed bucket nearby, hat in his lap, his weathered face heavy with thought. He had spent years believing his purpose was buried beside his family. But as the horse shifted softly and let out a long, exhausted breath, Caleb began to wonder if fate had dragged this broken creature to his dying ranch for a reason. Because sometimes, when the world abandons something extraordinary, it does not disappear. Sometimes, it waits for the right broken soul to carry it home. Morning came slow and silver across the Wyoming plains, with dawn spilling pale light over frost-covered fences and the tired bones of Caleb Dawson's ranch. Snow clung to the paddock rails, and smoke curled weakly from the chimney of the small farmhouse where Silence had lived too long. Caleb stood in the barn doorway, a steaming cup of black coffee warming his hands, watching as the grey Mustang lifted its head from fresh straw. For the first time, there was more steadiness in the animal's posture. The trembling had eased. Beneath the bruises, dirt, and scars, there was something ancient in the horse's bearing, something wild, proud, and untouched by the cruelty it had endured. Caleb stepped closer, his boots creaking softly over the wooden floor. "You are tougher than you look," he murmured. The horse's ears flicked toward him. It was not trust yet, but it was no longer fear alone. Caleb had spent enough years around horses to understand that survival often began with the smallest surrender. Over the next several days, winter settled hard over the valley, but inside the weathered barn, something fragile and remarkable began to thaw. Caleb worked with patient ritual, feeding the horse small portions, brushing mud from its coat, cleaning old wounds, and speaking in the low, steady voice he once used with frightened colts and his young son alike. He gave the horse a name on the fourth morning, after watching the silver-gray figure stand beneath a shaft of sunrise breaking through the rafters like something carved from mist. "Ghost," he said quietly. "Because you should not still be here, but somehow you are." The name stayed. Ghost remained cautious, often flinching at sudden sounds or the scrape of metal, but each day, the Mustang's strength returned another inch. Muscles hidden beneath starvation slowly reawakened. Its coat, once dulled by filth, began to shimmer faintly like moonlight over snow. Caleb noticed the intelligence in Ghost's pale blue eyes more than anything. This was no ordinary ranch horse. Ghost watched everything. Measured everything. And sometimes, late at night, Caleb would catch the stallion staring not at the barn walls, but toward the northern ridge beyond his property, as though listening to something distant only he could hear. Word traveled quickly in small Wyoming towns, even to forgotten ranches. By the end of the week, old Earl Bennett from the neighboring spread stopped by with feed supplies and suspicion written deep in his weathered face. "Heard you dragged home some half-dead animal off County 12, Earl said, eyeing Ghost carefully. But when the old rancher spotted the Crescent Moon brand, his expression shifted. "Caleb, that mark, you best be careful." Caleb frowned. "You know it." Earl hesitated, glancing toward the horse. Black Hollow Ridge had enemies, same as money always does. Horses like that did not just disappear. Men made sure of it. The warning settled heavy in Caleb's chest long after Earl left. That night, standing beneath a frozen sky dusted with stars, Caleb rested one hand against Ghost's neck. the stallion's breath rose warm into the cold darkness. For years, Caleb had drifted through life like a man already buried. But now, with this mysterious creature under his care, an old secret stirring like wind beneath snow, he felt something unfamiliar taking root. Purpose. Because out on that broken patch of Wyoming earth, a lonely rancher had not merely rescued a horse. He may have uncovered the first thread of a truth powerful enough to change everything. By mid-December, the Wyoming winter had tightened its grip across the valley, turning Caleb Dawson's ranch into a world of white silence, where snowdrifts pressed against old fence lines and the wind sang through cottonwoods like a hymn too old to forget. Yet within the shelter of the barn, life continued its quiet rebellion. Ghost had grown stronger. His ribs no longer cut so sharply beneath his silver-gray coat, and the dull exhaustion that once clouded his pale blue eyes had given way to something sharper: awareness, intelligence, and a restlessness Caleb could not ignore. Every morning before sunrise, Caleb moved through the same steady rhythm. Feed. Water. Brushing. Gentle words. And every morning, Ghost met him with a little more trust. The Mustang no longer recoiled from Caleb's hand. Instead, he leaned subtly into the brush strokes, as though remembering what dignity felt like. But there were still shadows buried beneath that healing. Certain sounds, a rattling chain, the clang of metal, even the creak of an old gate, could send Ghost stiffening in fear, his muscles coiling tight. Beneath his skin, Caleb recognized trauma when he saw it. Some wounds lived deeper than flesh. One bitter afternoon, while repairing a broken section of paddock fence, Caleb decided to let Ghost stretch his legs inside the enclosed pasture. Snow crunched beneath powerful hooves as the Mustang stepped cautiously into the open, nostrils flaring at the sharp winter air. For a moment, Ghost simply stood there, his breath rising like smoke against the pale sky. Then something changed. His ears snapped forward. His entire body went still. Caleb followed the horse's gaze toward the northern ridge, the old, forested stretch of land bordering the abandoned Black Hollow territory. Without warning, Ghost began moving. At first, it was a trot. Then a determined canter through knee-deep snow, straight toward the farthest edge of the pasture. Caleb called out, alarmed, but Ghost did not panic. He was focused. Intent. Reaching the fence line, the Mustang stopped near an ancient cottonwood tree where the snow had drifted thickest. Then, with startling force, Ghost began pouring at the frozen earth beneath it. Caleb frowned and hurried through the snow, his boots heavy with ice. "What are you doing, boy?" he asked, breathless. Ghost continued digging, powerful hooves tearing through layers of snow and brittle dirt with near-desperate precision. Within minutes, something dark emerged beneath the frost. Caleb dropped to one knee and brushed away the earth with gloved hands. Wood. A small, weather-worn box, buried deep and hidden for years. His pulse quickened. Ghost stepped back, watching him with those impossible blue eyes. Caleb pried the frozen lid open carefully. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were old papers, brittle photographs, and a tarnished silver medallion bearing the unmistakable Black Hollow crest. Caleb's breath caught as he unfolded the first yellow document. Breeding records. Ownership transfers. Legal seals. And beneath them all, one shocking truth began to surface: Ghost was no discarded stray. He was direct bloodline. The last known descendant of Black Hollow Ridge's legendary foundation stock, thought lost for decades after the ranch's mysterious collapse. Caleb sat back in stunned silence, snow falling softly around him as pieces of a buried history clicked into place. This horse had not been abandoned by accident. Someone had tried to erase him. But standing there in the winter hush, with Ghost's steady breath clouding the frozen air, Caleb understood something powerful. The world had tried to bury more than a horse beneath that snow. It had tried to bury the truth. And now, against all odds, that truth had found its way home. That night, the storm returned with a low, mournful wind that rattled Caleb Dawson's barn walls and swept snow across the Wyoming plains like a curtain drawn by unseen hands. Inside the farmhouse, beneath the amber glow of an old oil lamp, Caleb sat alone at his weathered kitchen table, the contents of the buried box spread carefully before him. Dust, age, and silence had hidden these secrets for decades, but now each brittle page seemed to breathe life back into a forgotten past. Ghost stood visible through the frosted window in the barn beyond, his silver form shifting quietly beneath lantern light, no longer a discarded creature but living proof of something much larger. Caleb adjusted his reading glasses and studied the papers with growing disbelief. Black Hollow Ridge had not simply been a wealthy breeding ranch. It had once been one of the most respected Mustang conservation bloodlines in the American West, preserving rare wild genetics worth fortunes to breeders, conservationists, and powerful landowners alike. Yet the documents revealed sudden ownership transfers, falsified auction records, and suspicious legal signatures dated just weeks before the devastating fire that supposedly destroyed the ranch. Caleb's jaw tightened. This had not been tragedy. It had been theft. Someone had orchestrated Black Hollow's fall, scattering its bloodline and burying its legacy beneath greed. Among the photographs was one image that made Caleb freeze. A younger version of himself, no older than 25, standing beside his late father at a regional livestock fair. And in the background, unmistakable even then, stood the founder of Black Hollow Ridge, Samuel Granger. Caleb stared hard, old memories stirring like embers long buried. His father had known Granger. More than that, they had once spoken often about land rights, breeding ethics, and preserving wild Mustang lines from corporate ranch expansion. Caleb had been too young, too distracted, to understand the weight of those conversations. But now, pieces began locking into place. His father's sudden warnings before his death. The unexplained sale of neighboring properties. The pressure to abandon sections of family land near the northern ridge. Caleb leaned back heavily, realization settling over him like cold iron. His ranch had never just been failing farmland. It bordered something valuable. Something others had spent decades trying to conceal. Ghost had not simply wandered onto his property by chance. He had returned to the one remaining place connected to the truth. By morning, Caleb saddled his old truck and drove into the nearest town, where courthouse archives and local records still gathered dust beneath fluorescent lights. Hours turned into revelation. Property maps confirmed it. Black Hollow's original grazing routes crossed directly through Caleb's northern acreage. More shocking still, hidden mineral rights and protected conservation easements tied to those lands could be worth millions under modern federal preservation programs. Caleb sat in stunned silence as County Clerk Martha Reeves slid the final folder toward him. "Your father never sold his share," she said softly. "Looks like he held onto the one parcel they could never legally take." Outside, snow drifted softly over Main Street, but Caleb barely felt the cold. For years, he had believed life had stripped him down to loss, leaving only loneliness and survival. But now, standing on the edge of a truth generations had tried to erase, he understood something profound. Ghost had not just survived cruelty. He had carried a buried legacy home. And Caleb, the lonely rancher everyone had forgotten, might be the only man left who could protect it. Because sometimes, the miracle is not merely in what survives, but in what it was always destined to reveal. The first sign that buried truths were beginning to surface came not from the land, nor from Ghost, but from the sudden arrival of polished trucks where only dust-covered ranch vehicles usually dared to roam. 3 days after Caleb Dawson uncovered the Black Hollow records, a convoy of black SUVs rolled slowly down the frozen road toward his ranch, their dark frames cutting across the white Wyoming landscape like oil on snow. Caleb stood on his porch, hat low over his brow, one gloved hand resting near Ghost's reins as the vehicles approached. He did not need introductions to recognize wealth when it came dressed in silence and expensive tires. The lead vehicle stopped near the sagging gate, and a tall man in a tailored wool coat stepped out, his polished boots unsuited for ranch mud. Richard Vane, CEO of Vane Agricultural Holdings, one of the largest private land development firms in the region. Caleb knew the name. Everyone did. Vane had spent years quietly buying struggling ranches, mineral rights, and conservation land across Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado. "Mr. Dawson," Vane said smoothly, his smile practiced but hollow. "I believe you may have come into possession of something that belongs to my company." Caleb remained still, his weathered face unreadable. "Only thing on this land belongs to me," he replied. Vane's gaze shifted toward Ghost, and for the first time, his calm expression tightened. The silver-gray Mustang stood tall beside Caleb, stronger now, his winter coat gleaming beneath the pale sun, blue eyes sharp with quiet intelligence. Vane stepped forward slightly. "That horse," he said, "is tied to legal property disputes you do not understand. I am prepared to offer you a generous sum for him, along with your northern acreage." Caleb almost laughed, though no humor touched his eyes. For years, nobody had offered him anything but pity for his failing ranch. And now, suddenly, powerful men appeared at his gate with checkbooks. "Not for sale," Caleb said simply. The cold wind seemed to sharpen between them. Vane's smile faded. "You are standing in the way of opportunities far bigger than yourself." Caleb's voice remained steady as stone. "Would not be the first time." For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Ghost shifted. The Mustang stepped slightly in front of Caleb, his powerful body protective, ears pinned with unmistakable warning. It was not aggression. It was instinct. Vane noticed. So did his men. Something ancient and undeniable passed through that frozen moment. Ghost knew this man. Or at least the kind of man who had tried to erase him. Vane's expression darkened, but he adjusted his gloves with careful restraint. "Think carefully, Mr. Dawson. The past has a way of becoming dangerous when disturbed." Caleb did not answer. He simply watched as the convoy turned and disappeared back down the snow-covered road. But the message lingered long after the engines faded. This was no longer just about saving a horse. Caleb had stepped into a battle over legacy, land, and greed powerful enough to destroy Black Hollow Ridge once before. That evening, as snow fell soft against the barn roof, Caleb secured every document in a fireproof lockbox and made copies for legal counsel in Cheyenne. For the first time in years, the lonely rancher was no longer merely surviving. He was preparing to fight. And beside him stood Ghost, the horse they had tried to bury, now stronger than ever. Because sometimes, when kindness uncovers the truth, it does not just heal old wounds. It becomes the one thing powerful enough to challenge those who created them. News traveled faster than winter wind across rural Wyoming, and within weeks, Caleb Dawson's forgotten ranch became the center of conversations in feed stores, diners, county offices, and courthouse halls. What began as whispers about a mysterious silver Mustang soon ignited something larger, a public reckoning decades overdue. Local journalists from Casper and Cheyenne arrived first, drawn by rumors of hidden Black Hollow documents, contested land rights, and the astonishing reappearance of a bloodline long presumed extinct. Cameras rolled across Caleb's snow-covered property, capturing the weathered rancher and the proud gray stallion standing side by side against the wide American plains. For many, Ghost became more than a horse. He became a symbol of survival. A living testament to what greed had tried, and failed, to erase. Caleb, once a man nearly forgotten by his own community, found himself thrust unwillingly into the spotlight. But unlike Richard Vane's polished representatives, Caleb spoke plainly, his words carrying the weight of honesty rather than strategy. This horse was left to die, he told reporters beneath the barn's old wooden beams. And if someone could do that to a living creature just to bury the truth, imagine what else they buried. The statement spread quickly, stirring outrage far beyond county lines. Conservation groups, Mustang preservation organizations, and legal advocates began reviewing Black Hollow's long-buried records. Federal investigators reopened inquiries into fraudulent land acquisitions tied to Vane agricultural holdings. Former employees of Black Hollow Ridge, many now elderly, came forward with testimonies about suspicious sales, missing horses, and threats that had silenced them for years. One by one, the silence cracked. Then came the invitation that changed everything. The Wyoming Heritage Equine Showcase, one of the state's most prestigious annual events, offered Caleb and Ghost a place in its winter exhibition, not as competitors, but as honored guests representing one of the rarest surviving Mustang bloodlines in American history. Caleb hesitated. Crowds, applause, and public attention were worlds away from the grief-worn solitude he had built around himself. But standing in Ghost's stall that night, his hand resting against the stallion's steady neck, Caleb understood this was no longer just his burden. This was history. On the day of the event, snow dusted the fairgrounds while thousands gathered beneath bright arena lights and cold December skies. Wealthy breeders, ranchers, reporters, and ordinary families filled the stands. Richard Vane himself attended, seated among corporate sponsors, his expression carefully composed. Then Caleb entered the ring. Riding not with arrogance, but with quiet dignity, the lonely rancher guided Ghost into the center of the arena. Gasps swept through the crowd. Fully restored, Ghost moved like living silver, strong, graceful, and impossibly noble. The scars of abandonment had not broken him. They had become part of his legend. As official Black Hollow lineage records were presented publicly for the first time in decades, the audience rose in thunderous applause. Not for wealth. Not for power. But for truth reclaimed. Caleb looked out over the sea of faces, his weathered eyes reflecting something long absent from his life, peace. Because in that moment, the broken rancher and the discarded horse had become something greater than survivors. They had become proof that even the most buried truths can still rise beneath open skies. And sometimes, the world's greatest miracle is not found in being chosen by power, but in refusing to be erased by it. The winter after the Wyoming Heritage Equine Showcase was unlike any Caleb Dawson had seen in years. Snow still blanketed the plains, and the wind still howled across the northern ridge, but for the first time since tragedy hollowed his life, the old ranch no longer felt like a place waiting to fade. It felt alive. Support from conservation groups and legal victories over contested land claims had begun restoring not only Caleb's property, but Black Hollow's lost legacy. New fencing rose where old boards once sagged. The barn roof was repaired. Federal protection secured the northern acreage, preserving it as Mustang sanctuary land for future generations. Yet for Caleb, the true miracle was never the money, nor the land. It was Ghost. The stallion had become his companion in every sense, moving through each day with quiet loyalty that seemed almost human. Their bond, forged in abandonment and hardship, had become something sacred. But healing, Caleb had learned, did not mean life stopped testing what it had rebuilt. In late February, a brutal snowstorm descended without warning, fiercer than any forecast predicted. Wind gusts reached nearly 60 miles per hour, swallowing roads, collapsing drifts, and driving temperatures far below zero. Caleb had been repairing fence lines near the northern ridge when white oak conditions swept over the valley with terrifying speed. Within minutes, familiar land vanished beneath blinding snow. His truck could not reach him. His radio signal died. Alone on horseback, Caleb became disoriented among the rolling hills and frozen gullies, the storm erasing every landmark he had known since childhood. Hours passed in bitter cold. Exhaustion set in. Caleb's horse stumbled, and eventually, he was forced to seek shelter on foot after becoming trapped near an icy ravine hidden beneath fresh snow. Wind tore through his heavy coat. His hands numbed. For the first time in years, Caleb felt death's cold shadow brush near. Back at the ranch, Ghost became frantic. Witnesses later said the Mustang paced violently, refusing feed, his instincts sharper than any storm warning. Then, without command, Ghost broke through a partially secured paddock gate and vanished into the blizzard. Search crews had only just begun assembling when a ranch hand spotted movement through the storm's white veil, a silver-gray figure cutting through snowdrifts with impossible speed. Ghost navigated the frozen ridge as though guided by something beyond sight, following Caleb sent through miles of dangerous terrain. Near dusk, as Caleb's strength finally began to fail, he heard it, the distant thunder of hooves. Through the swirling white emerged Ghost, mane lashing like silver fire against the storm. The Mustang reached him, pressing warmth and strength against Caleb's freezing body. Somehow, through instinct, trust, and determination, Ghost guided his broken rancher back across the blinding plains toward safety. Step by step. Breath by breath. When they finally emerged near the ranch perimeter hours later, rescue crews stood speechless beneath floodlights and falling snow. Caleb, frostbitten but alive, slid weakly from Ghost's back and collapsed to his knees, one trembling hand resting against the horse's neck. Tears froze against his weathered cheeks. "You saved me," he whispered. And in the quiet aftermath of that terrible storm, no one present doubted it. The abandoned horse Caleb had once rescued from a roadside ditch had repaid that mercy in full. Because sometimes, kindness given to the broken does not simply heal them. Sometimes, it returns when you need it most, carrying you home through the storm. Spring arrived slowly over Caleb Dawson's Wyoming ranch, as it always had, with thawing snow fields, muddy fence lines, and golden light stretching longer across the open plains. But this year, something profound had changed. The land no longer felt haunted by loss alone. Beneath the warming sun, life was returning, not just to the ranch, but to Caleb himself. The northern ridge, once nearly stolen by greed and hidden behind decades of silence, had officially been designated protected Mustang sanctuary land under the restored Black Hollow Legacy Preserve. Conservationists, historians, and ranchers from across the American West came to witness what had once seemed impossible, the rebirth of a bloodline, a legacy, and a man many had quietly assumed was fading into memory. Caleb, still weathered by grief and years of solitude, remained humble through it all. He did not seek fame. He did not chase fortune. Instead, he chose something far greater. He turned his ranch into a refuge for abandoned, injured, and displaced horses, offering broken creatures the same mercy Ghost had once been given on a frozen roadside. One by one, neglected animals arrived, some frightened, some scarred, some simply forgotten. And under Caleb's patient care, they healed. Local children began visiting the sanctuary with their families, their laughter once again echoing through fields that had known too much silence. Veterans struggling with invisible wounds found peace among the horses. Young ranch hands learned not only horsemanship, but compassion. The place that grief had nearly buried became known across Wyoming as Dawson Ridge Sanctuary, a living symbol that healing was possible, even after unimaginable loss. And always, at the heart of it stood Ghost. The silver-gray Mustang became more than legend. He became the spirit of the sanctuary itself. Proud, watchful, and unbroken, Ghost often roamed the protected northern acres freely, his descendants now carefully preserved to ensure Black Hollow's bloodline would never again vanish beneath corruption. Visitors spoke in hushed tones when they saw him crest the ridgeline at sunset, silver coat glowing like living moonlight against the western sky. Some called him miraculous. Others simply called him proof. Caleb never argued. Either way. Years later, sitting on his porch as amber dusk settled over the ranch, Caleb often reflected on the night he found a trembling horse buried beneath a torn burlap sack. Back then, he had believed he was rescuing something the world had discarded. But life, in its quiet wisdom, had revealed a deeper truth. Ghost had rescued him, too. From grief. From purposelessness. From becoming buried beneath his own sorrow. As spring winds moved softly through the cottonwoods and distant hoofbeats rolled like a heartbeat across the land, Caleb rested his hand on the porch rail and watched Ghost lead a small herd across the ridge. The sight filled the old rancher's weary soul with peace he once thought impossible. Because sometimes, the weakest creature carries the strongest truth. Sometimes, what the world abandons becomes the very miracle that teaches it how to heal. And on that wide Wyoming horizon, beneath endless American skies, a lonely man and a broken horse became something neither time nor cruelty could erase, a legend built not by power, but by kindness.